I went to my cousin Ava's wedding a few days ago. I'm still processing what's happened. I'll try to get everything out as best I can. Ava has been dating some guy named Ethan for the past year. Being in their 30s, they sort of fast-tracked the whole marriage thing. I'd never met the guy, and I hadn't spoken to Ava in a few years, but what the hell, it was guaranteed to be a fun time. The groom walked down the aisle first, a tall, pale man in a dark suit. He stood at the front of the church and smiled. He smiled when Ava walked down the aisle. He smiled as they kissed after being pronounced husband and wife. He smiled as they walked out of the church. It didn't strike me as weird until we got to the reception. When they entered, he was still grinning that wide grin with his perfectly white, straight teeth. But up close, it looked, I don't know, wrong somehow. He wasn't really engaging with guests. He wasn't talking or laughing. He was just sort of scanning the place, staring, grinning wide without it really reaching his eyes. I guess he's smiling for the camera, I told myself. Or maybe he's a little socially awkward, and he figures nothing will go wrong if he just keeps smiling. It got really weird, however, when they served dinner. I watched him sitting at the sweetheart table with Ava, shoveling chicken piccata into his mouth as he still grinned, barely opening his mouth wide enough to get the bite, immediately closing it, making loud chewing noises as he chewed while grinning. Have you ever seen someone chew their food while grinning? It is completely unnatural looking. Smiling with your mouth closed, sure, but showing all your teeth grinning as you chew? It was so weird. They eventually came to our table to say hi. I couldn't tear my eyes away from his face. He was still grinning. His wide blue eyes were jittering from person to person at the table. His face looked like a mask. There was no warmth. It was like looking at a statue. I whispered this to my sister, and once they left, "There's something seriously wrong with him. Why is he smiling like that?" My sister thought I was being a catty old maid. Well, old mister. "Shut up, he looks fine." "No, he doesn't." "He looks like he's madly in love," she snapped back. "Stop being jealous. Geez, Matt." That hurt. It honestly did. None of the other guests seemed to think anything was wrong. They thought it was all fine. Him grinning through the first dance, through the speeches, through the fucking champagne toast. He tilted the champagne, flew into his grinning mouth without spilling a drop somehow. This is so weird. I excused myself to use the bathroom, but that was my first mistake, not realizing he had disappeared from the dance floor. As I was washing my hands, a stall door swung open behind me. In the mirror over my shoulder, I saw Ethan standing there. His skin looked milky white in the bright lights. His blue, bulgy frog eyes stared at me, and he was smiling. I don't mean that he saw me and then smiled. No, when he opened that stall door, he was already smiling. He walked over and began washing his hands at the sink right next to me, even though there were 3 other sinks. Our shoulders bumped. "Great wedding," I mumbled, trying to be friendly. He turned to look down at me, slowly. His blue eyes bored into mine. My heart began to pound. "Music's great too," I said nervously to fill the silence. He just stared at me. That's when I realized he hadn't said a single word the entire wedding. There were no vows. He just nodded when the officiant asked if he took Ava as his wife. He didn't thank the best man after the speech, and I hadn't even seen him talking to Ava at the sweetheart table, just smiling and staring. I backed away. His eyes tracked me as I went. Just as I reached the bathroom door, he stretched up to his full height and stared down at me. He looked even taller than he had in the reception hall, somehow under the fluorescent lights. Then he stopped smiling. As his face relaxed, his cheeks sagged, his forehead drooped, the skin of his face began to shift and slide. I froze as his face began to pull and separate from his skull. He grinned, and everything stretched back into place. I finally leapt into action and darted out the bathroom door. I went back to my sister and grabbed her arm. "We have to get out of here," I breathed. "Ethan, Will you shut up already?" she said, barely even looking at me. And then Ethan sauntered in, long legs taking him smoothly across the dance floor. He slowed as he passed our table on his way back to Ava. He reached out and squeezed my shoulder. It's been 3 days. The skin of my shoulder is pulsing with pain, like it's infected somehow, and I can't help but notice every time I look in the mirror. My face looks a little saggier, a little looser, like it isn't quite attached the same way anymore. So I've started smiling more, just to hold everything in place. My student submitted the most disturbing living history project I've ever seen. One of my least favorite parts about being a middle school history teacher is the bullshit living history assignments we give at the end of every school year. Kids are supposed to sit with their grandparents and videotape, voice record, or transcribe their oldest memories for posterity. Inferno is the way to bring up their GPA. I have been doing this for 17 years, and when I collected the projects this time around, I assumed they would be as dull, if not duller than usual. This had not been a particularly bright class after all. So I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and prepared for a long night of, I only owned 2 pairs of pants when I was your age, and my brother got beat with a newspaper for hitting a baseball into a neighbor's yard. And of course, these projects were prepared with innocent old person comments that were so horribly sexist and racist you just had to laugh. Now, I had a girl in my class whom I will call Olivia. She was pudgy, quiet, and proved herself as a consistent B student. I expected her project to be as unremarkable as her, and perhaps that's why I was so profoundly disturbed by what I witnessed that night. Olivia had submitted 2 discs for some reason, so I began with the one marked Interview. My screen hiccuped twice before a grainy image of a living room came into view. The place was a horde as hell. Olivia was curled up in an armchair, clutching a notebook and looking like a scared animal. Across from her sat a man with somber countenance, smoking a cigarette and staring at her expectantly. "Go ahead," a woman's voice whispered from behind the camera. Olivia's owlish eyes flashed towards the screen, then back to the man. "I am here with my great-uncle Stephen," she began, almost inaudibly. "He's going to tell us about his oldest memories from being in the army." Great-uncle Stephen looked like he'd rather be in a goddamn trench at the moment, but he waited patiently for the questions to begin. Not surprisingly, Olivia read verbatim from the suggested question sheet I had handed out to the students. He answered her curtly. Once or twice I heard her mother whisper, "Speak up, Olivia," from behind the camera. Typical boring shit. So I was intrigued when Olivia set down the notebook and asked, "Did you like being in the army?" That was totally off script. Great-uncle Stephen emitted a chain-smoker's wheeze. "Nope. Glad to get out of my town, though." "Where did you go?" "Balkans." "Uh-huh," she said. I doubted she knew what the Balkans were, and my suspicions were confirmed when she asked, "Was Bacchus very different from here?" "Yes." Mum cleared her throat from behind the camera, perhaps encouraging Great-uncle Stephen to be a little more forthcoming. But Olivia seemed genuinely interested. "Uncle Stephen," she asked, "what is your very worst memory from the army?" The old man crushed his cigarette in the ashtray and then slowly lifted himself out of his chair. "I'll be back," he mumbled. The camera cut off. When the screen flashed back on, everything was the same, except Great-uncle Stephen had several pieces of paper in plastic sleeves laid atop all the crap sitting on his coffee table. One he held in his hand. "I was a kid when I enlisted," he said, looking at Olivia. "Your brother's age," he told her. Olivia nodded. "I never saw combat. Both of my deployments were to cities in Eastern Europe that had been destroyed by civil wars. Everything was a mess. I felt like a janitor, for fuck's sake." Mum coughed. Great-uncle Stephen sighed and looked at his paper. "My unit was assigned to a school that had been obliterated by all the violence. Broken windows, caved-in rooms, and for some reason, the part that got to me the most was that the school had been like this for years before we got there. No one had lifted a finger to fix it. I saw kids walk by it on their way to go beg for money or whatever shit they did." The camera dipped towards the floor as I heard Mum whisper harshly at Great-uncle Stephen. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it wasn't hard to imagine. "Do you want to hear this goddamn story or not?" I heard him bark in response. "Then you better let me tell it how I want." "Mom," Olivia chimed, "please stop interrupting. Are you presenting this in front of the class?" "No, Mom, we're just handing it in to the teacher." "I'm sure he's heard the word shit before," Great-uncle Stephen contributed helpfully. I wasn't a he as a matter of fact, but other than the statement was accurate. The camera was lifted, and after a couple of blurry focus adjustments, the shot was the same as before. I'm talking too much anyway," he grumbled. He lifted the piece of paper in his hand close to his face. "In the basement, I found this letter. I didn't know what it said, but I had a buddy of mine translate it, so I'm going to read it now, and then I'll tell you what I saw in the basement." A chill ran down my spine. Mom zoomed into Great-uncle Stephen and his letter. His palsied hands trembled as he held up the paper. This is what he read. "Dear Sir, I never loved my country. So many of these skirmishes are born from patriotism, a power struggle for the shards of a once great empire. But I do not care what name my home has on a map. This fighting is senseless, and I stay as far away from it as I can. It was not these attacks and disorganized violence that took the lives of my wife and child. It was illness. Mercifully, it happened quickly for the baby. Nadia suffered for longer. I watched in horror, knowing I could do nothing for them. My only solace is that I was there for them every step of the way. I stopped going to work one day, and no one came after me. I doubt they noticed I was gone. Since the school was simply across a field visible from my window, it would have been easy to go for a few hours each day and come home quickly to care for them. But what was the point? All I did was clean floors. I was as useless to the world as I was to my family. I tried to take Nadia to the hospital, but the journey was too long and taxing. I brought her home and she died that night. After Nadia and the baby were gone, well, I don't remember much. I didn't leave my hovel, barely ate and slept, thought many times of taking my own life. Tempting though it was, I felt paralyzed by my own helplessness. The one thing that kept me sane was my radio. I never turned it off once, even though I didn't listen to the words being said. In fact, the channel I got the clearest was in English, I think, which I don't speak a lick of. But the voices, the music, and the true knowledge that life existed beyond this violent city sustained me. I have no idea how long passed before I saw the light of day again. I was dizzy from hunger, so finding food was my priority. My radio came with me, of course. Since I first told myself up, it has gone everywhere with me. It talks to me as I sleep and as I wake. I don't know what it's saying, but I know I would die without it. Once I had some water and food, it occurred to me that the only thing left to do was go back to work. So I did. The following morning, I simply returned to the school where I was a janitor and got back to work. Nobody made a big deal out of it. Like I said, Nadia had been sick for a long time, and those who worked at the school knew it. I appreciate that no one had pestered me to come back to work during the hardest days of my life. The teachers never said much to me, but we smiled at each other in the halls, and that mutual respect was perhaps the reason I decided to come back at all. The place had gone to the dogs without me, so I simply grabbed my broom and rags from my closet and set to cleaning. Everyone is grateful to have me back, I know. And the best part is that nobody minds my radio. I bring it with me everywhere and keep the volume low enough not to disrupt the students. No one has ever complained. In fact, I suspect they like it. The schoolhouse is not very big, but does require a lot of maintenance. The floors are always sticky and stained, so I spend most of my time mopping. Kids make messes. I guess that's why I'm still in business. Sometimes I have to move things around to make sure I get every spot on the floor beautiful and clean, but I take pride in that. And the repairs. The school always needs tune-ups and here and there, and I'm happy to help. Some days I'm reconstructing a desk that broke as I whistle along with the radio. Other times I handle more serious structural issues. Days when I have work like this, I feel truly instrumental, like a cog in a larger machine. How could this school survive without me? It took me a long time, but I once again feel that I have purpose. There is a larder behind the school that is full of preserved food. In lieu of payment, I am allowed to take as much food as I need. The art arrangement is fine. What would I do with money anyway? I used to bring the food back to my home, just one field away from the school, but when I started sleeping in the basement, no one seemed to notice. This school is special to me, and I cannot leave it unguarded. When I am besieged with memories of my wife and baby, I turn up the volume on the radio to drown out such thoughts. It works for me every time. Except this morning, because this morning I woke up to dead silence. I frantically examined the radio to see what had happened. I honestly cannot tell you how many days in a row I have been using it. Did it simply live out its life and die naturally? I have spent the entire day trying to fix it. Most of this time, I have been crying. I am losing my mind without it. I have given myself until sundown. If I cannot fix it by then, I'm going to take my life. I am writing this because the sunlight is starting to die, and I know what my fate shall be. I have thought about taking one last walk through the halls of the school, saying goodbye to the students and teachers. I know I will be missed, but I cannot bring myself to leave this room. I cannot go anywhere knowing that my radio is dead in here. There are no tears in me. It feels now like I can't catch my breath. I vomited what little food I had in my stomach, and I am growing dizzy again, like I did after Nadia died. I am not long for this world. But before I take my life, I have closed the door to this room and stuck a chair beneath the handle. It is the only room in the basement and has a small casement that lets in just enough light for me to see what I am doing. If anyone is kind enough to come looking for me, they should not be met with this gruesome sight. Perhaps they will see the door is blocked, smell my rotting body, and simply forget I ever existed. But I have placed both my radio and this note outside the door. Kind sir, if you are reading this, I have one humble request. Please fix it. Save my radio. It did not deserve to die in its sleep, and I am ashamed that I cannot revive it. Now I am ready to join Nadia and little Ludmila in heaven. I hope this school can find another janitor who loves and cares for the way I do. The hour is now. Do not forget my radio. Stanislav. When Mum zoomed back out, Olivia had tears in her eyes. Thank you for sharing, Uncle Stephen, Mum said, her voice choked. I think we have enough. Wait, Olivia chirped. He said there's more. What did you find? Before Great Uncle Stephen could open his mouth, the image disappeared. My jaw dropped. Was that it? What did Great Uncle Stephen see? I promptly remembered that there was a second disc. This one was unmarked, but I hoped it contained the rest of the interview. There was no video, only audio. The voice that started up was Olivia's. Hi, Miss Garrity. I'm sorry about my mom, but she refused to record the rest of what my uncle was saying, but I asked him to continue and secretly recorded the story as a voice memo on my phone. I remember you said earlier this year that history is written by the people who win wars. She sucked in a breath and commenced crying. But everyone's history is important, even if they are sad, pathetic people. And even if they have never won a single thing in their life. I haven't slept through the night since I finished this project, but you have to hear what my uncle has to say. There were tears in my eyes, too. The sincerity of her words was beautiful. I was also flattered that she had remembered some trite phrase I threw around because it was what my history teacher said to me. Before I got too sappy over it, the audio began again. Fine, came Mum's frustrated voice. If you want to hear the rest of the story, fine, but this is not appropriate for a school project. Let me finish, Great Uncle Stephen snapped. If it's too much for you, help yourself to a snack in the kitchen, but Olivia wants to know what happened. I heard her mother mumble something and walk away. Olivia and her uncle were alone. I imagined her looking at him expectantly. So, did you find the radio? Or did it get ruined when the school got blown up? He rasped, and I heard the distinct click of a lighter. That letter, he began slowly, had a date on it. What date? She inquired hungrily. It was dated 2 weeks before we started rebuilding the school. Didn't you say the school had been destroyed like 2 years ago? Yes, replied Great Uncle Stephen. It had been. There was silence as I felt goosebumps on my arms. The images that came to mind were almost too overwhelming to express, but Great Uncle Stephen put them into words effortlessly. Clearly he had spent his whole life thinking about this. This man, this Stanislav, went to a vandalized, falling apart schoolhouse and cleaned up blood and rubble like it was spilled drinks and dust. He smiled at dead bodies in the hallway and believed they were smiling back at him because they liked his radio. He moved around corpses so he could sweep the ground under them. The roof was half collapsed, so when it rained, he must have got soaking wet, but was so oblivious that he didn't even feel a thing. I could hear Olivia crying steadily. I found the larder he was talking about. It was all pickled, preserved food that probably tasted like shit. Most of the stuff was moldy. Did you see the dead body? Yes, hanging from the ceiling, but still amazingly lifelike. He wasn't rotting away. This hadn't happened years ago. Did he look peaceful? She asked, a chord of desperation in her voice. Couldn't tell you. The smell was rank and his face was blue, and his eyes were bulging like this. I imagined him demonstrating. In the radio, Olivia wept. I heard Great Uncle Stephen take a long drag of his cigarette. It was there all right, and it was still on. There's this painting my wife loves called Death and Life by Klimt. I don't know what she finds so fascinating about it. I made all the right noises when she showed me her beloved framed print when we first started dating. Oohing and eyeing and making up some bullshit about warm and cold color schemes and the specific choice of angles and line. She was an artist. Our first few dates involved long walks through museums, starting in Picasso's Blue Period and ending in heavy petting and blue balls. I took an art history course as an elective when I was finishing up my doctorate. I remembered enough of the lingo to charm my fantastically gorgeous future wife and lure her back to my stupidly filthy apartment. Retalking me is the foul bachelor frog, sitting on a lily pad made of empty takeout containers, surrounded by a pond of enough unwashed clothes to keep a laundromat in business for a cool 6 months. I remember scrambling to find 2 of any sort of cup-like container for the bottle of wine we had brought back while she was in the bathroom. I rinsed out a couple of coffee mugs and ran into the bedroom to try to clean up the condom wrappers that had been sitting on my bedside table since 2003. On the bed, neatly laid out against the rest of the chaos, were my wife's dress, bra, and panties. She came out of the bathroom completely nude, aside from a pair of high heels, took the wine from me, and took a swig straight from the bottle. I fell totally, completely, and irrevocably in love. I have no head for artistic things. I work in finance. I get creative with numbers, not paint. But I fucking love her stuff. She's made a name for herself over the past few years. Critics call her the American Damien Hirst. One of her first exhibits was composed of a dozen oil paintings of rotting pastries, surrounding an actual cake filled with thousands of dead ladybugs being fed to a mummified tarantula dressed up as Little Miss Muffet. I have no idea what it meant, but it was successful, and catered by Balthazar, So I ate about 20 croissants. They did not have bugs in them. I checked. She was amazing. She had the body of a Laker girl and the face of a Modigliani model, and still does. She's charming, charismatic, deep, the kind of person people flock to, want to be around constantly. She fucked like she had something to prove. She had a twisted sense of humor. As soon as I hooked a job with enough figures to keep a girl like her satisfied the way she should be, I proposed. Bought her a historical brownstone in the city with a garden full of roses and hardwood mahogany floors. And for the first few years, she seemed happy. We were the kind of couple you see in New York magazine and scoff at because they're just too damned lucky. But we had a rough spot, like whole married couples do. She was still superficially the same woman I fell in love with. Looked amazing. People always asked me when she was going to host the next dinner party. She still had an amazing eye for art. I knew she was miserable. I could see it, the misery, in the corner of her eyes and the curve of her mouth. It happened gradually. First it was the shower curtain. She brought 3 or 4 of them from a small boutique downtown, brought them home so we could choose one out together. We decided on one, pale blue, made of material that was impractical and way too expensive for a drapery in a bathroom, but we had the money, and it made her happy, so why the hell not? A few days later, I was shaving and realized she still hadn't put the curtain up. It wasn't until about a month after that I caught a glimpse of it hanging up in her studio, cut to shreds and dyed till it was almost unrecognizable. I chose to ignore it because I had learned it's usually not the best course of action to call an artist out on their creative license, unless you want to start an all-out war with no discernible end. A year after that, though, I had no choice. She had been so on edge, it was like she was standing on a razor. She usually had a show every 4 months or so, and if anything, she had too many ideas. The galleries always asked her to trim down her collections. When the year passed without so much as a single finished painting, I started to worry, both about her well-being and our bank account. We were extravagant spenders, and each of her shows would bring in a cool $20,000 that paid for a few months of European beaches and ski trips in Aspen. The final straw, though, is when she burned down the roses. It turned out she had finished dozens of projects over the year. She had hated all of it, and had either destroyed or painted over everything. While I was at the office, she flew off the handle, doused about 16 canvases in lighter fluid, and set the yard on fire. When I got the call from the fire department, I rushed home to find her sitting in the back of an ambulance, covered in ashes, blonde hair singed at the ends. She was smoking a cigarette. I looked over the burnt flowers, the skeletons of her paintings, the ruined limbs of broken sculptures, and asked her what happened and why. She took a drag of the cigarette and said, "It was mine to burn." She took big, fancy pictures of the inferno. A family of bunnies suffocated in the smoke. She had them stuffed and mounted in size order on a baking soda volcano like the kind you see in middle school science fairs. She gathered up a few of the charred bits and pieces, wired it together, and made some warped, pained-looking kind of phoenix thing weighing in at 400 pounds and easily over 8 feet high. She called the whole thing From the Ashes, and the reviews in the Times called it incendiary, her first foray into becoming a true artist. Someone bought the phoenix. I pity the person who wakes up every day and looks at that strange thing, suspended in constant agony. We were both drunk at a random, expensive, vaguely Dante's Inferno-themed bar in San Francisco when I finally got a chance to ask her what was bothering her. We had been making dark jokes all night about the beautiful irony of her show and our current local. At first, she vehemently denied anything was wrong, angrily pointing out that we had made 4 times as much off of her last show as anything before it, that it had more than covered the damages, that it had paid for the vacation we were on. I stayed silent. She tossed her newly cropped hair and looked like she was going to open up for a second. I saw her soft blue eyes fill with tears. Then she took a shot of whiskey from a glass that had a bull's head and smirked. "Well, for starters," she slurred, nonchalantly dangling the glass from the bull's nose ring, "I'm fairly certain I'm pregnant." She let the glass drop from her finger, and it shattered on the floor as she slid out of her seat and stumbled to the exit. I sat there for a while and drank more, feeling furious, confused, and miserable. I remembered her face when she showed me that Klimt painting. I remembered how she wore glasses back then, and how she pushed them up the bridge of her nose when she smiled as I talked about the fucking warm and the fucking cold colors and the fucking angles and lines. We converted her studio into a nursery. Rather, I did, while she stayed in San Francisco and did God knows what with her artist friends. I had a landscaper come in and replant the roses. I worked a lot of the time. Drank myself to sleep while I skimmed through parenting books. She came back when she was almost full term. I came home from work one night to find sonogram pictures posted all over the fridge of 2 healthy-looking twins. Big baby girls. I walked into our bedroom and saw her dead asleep on top of the covers, belly swollen, smelling faintly like pot and paint thinner. She had a rainbow of dried paint on her fingertips. I loosened my tie and walked to the nursery. She had been busy. The canary yellow I had chosen was covered in a layer of translucent blue, and she had covered one wall in Klimtesque patterns and curliques. The creamy plush carpet was covered in paint splatters. She had worked furiously to finish. She cut a swathe from one of the new rose bushes and made a giant bouquet, shoving them so tightly in the vase so that some had escaped and made their way from their perch on the changing table to the floor. She had scattered them in the bassinet, on the windowsill. It was chaotic and beautiful. The next few years were peaceful for the most part. We bonded over raising the girls. Despite my wife's less than careful prenatal preparation, they were wickedly smart and beautiful. They both looked like her, the long curly blonde ringlets and blue eyes. Sometimes, when I put them to bed, I wonder if any of my DNA was in them at all. They were like miniature versions of her. My wife agreed to see a psychiatrist for a little bit. She took some medication for a while, Xanax, some mood stabilizers. Eventually, she and her doctor decided her crisis had been hormonal and temporary. We started having dinner parties again, soothed the gossip that had infected our social circles. She stopped painting and took up teaching at a university. She seemed content again, even happier than she was before. Every once in a while, I would catch a look in her eyes like repressed artillery fire, like she was ready to explode at any second. But it never lasted for longer than a few seconds before they went back to the soft cornflower blue I knew so well. And who doesn't get a little agitated every once in a while? I rose through the ranks at work. I loved the feeling of power that came with promotions. I loved my girls, and by God, I loved her. My crazy, disgusting, beautiful, hateful, and loving, extraordinary wife. Then came today. Today, I came home from work early. Today, my wife took the day off to be a chaperone on a class trip to the Met. They were after her for months because of her expertise in the art world. They wanted the children to experience the culture in the most sophisticated way possible. I thought it was ridiculous. They would want 3-year-olds in a private daycare. They saw more beauty in Cheerios than in Monet's water lilies. But they wore my wife down, and she was given a gaggle of toddlers and wide-eyed teachers to tour around the museum. I came home for lunch because I had forgotten my iPad that had notes on it for a presentation I was giving that night. I walked through the rose garden and noticed a tiny piece of sculpture left over from the Ashes exhibit from so long ago. It was half of a tiny bird. It had the kind of exquisite detail that my wife used to be so famous for. I was pretty sure it was an actual bird that she had cast in clay. I thought I could see a small piece of feather in one of the cracks. I idly wondered why I hadn't noticed it before. I went inside and poured myself a glass of orange juice. The fridge had pictures that my daughters drew, happy, crooked stick figures that looked nothing like the beautiful horrors their mother used to churn out. I was happy about that. I hoped they would fall in love with numbers like I did. It was absolutely silent, and I sipped the sweet citrus and enjoyed the nothingness. Then I thought I caught a vague scent of fresh paint in the air. Curious, I walked into the living room, and there was my wife, sitting on the leather couch with a bottle of wine, looking like an angel of death. She was covered, head to toe, in blue-gray body paint, with a special concentration underneath her eyes. She was wearing a revealing patchwork blue dress, covered in crosses of various shapes and sizes. Not a dress, I realized, but the shredded shower curtain from so many years ago. I could see most of her still perfect breasts, the curve of her waist. The bottle of wine was elongated and painted a strange shade of orange. The smell of paint was stronger in here, an overwhelming smell of lighter fluid and something else I couldn't place. She had shaven her head. I stared at her for a while. Minutes, an hour maybe. Eventually, she took a swig of wine from the bottle, swirling it around in her mouth. I noticed paint, deep blues and even deeper reds, around her fingers. I sat down in the armchair across from her, unable to think of what exactly I wanted to ask her. Maybe because I knew, maybe because I didn't want to know. I noticed the camera on the table between us. I went to pick it up, and she rested her grey hand on mine before I could, softly, gently, with all the familiarity of years of marriage. She opened her mouth to speak, soft pink lips made pallid by the paint. They were mine. And I've been sitting here, knowing what's behind the door to my daughter's room, with the Klimt wall we never repainted, knowing why my phone keeps ringing with calls from the school, from the NYPD, knowing why I couldn't find my sleeping pills last night, knowing what that smell is, seeing in my peripheral the red pooling and staining the carpet from underneath the door, the pile of clothes neatly folded next to my wife on the couch. I can picture the thick wire she used to fit all of her subjects where she wanted them. What a perfect, detailed recreation it must be. Because she's so perfect. I see the phoenix in my mind's eye. I hope, when she flicks that cigarette she's about to light, we both fucking burn.